Hello, my name is Nick Macrina, and this is for the internship class. This first slide is for the internship position. I work at the Defense Manpower Data Center. It is a hub for various government programs, more importantly, programs like medical information for soldiers and their families. For example, if a soldier wants to get prescription medication overseas, he has to be registered with the database that we have here at DMDC. And whenever he goes to get his medication, he swipes a card and it's double checked through our database and he can get his meds. But if for some reason our database goes down, he can't get his meds, it's going to be a problem. This place also houses the Defense Language Institute. It's an institute that trains our soldiers for whatever mission that they're going to do overseas. And as you can see, it's a pretty important part of the DoD infrastructure. My primary job when I was hired at DMDC is to be the asset manager, or to assist the current asset manager at the time. Asset management's job is to manage all the assets enterprise-wide. An asset is something over $70. It is an IT asset, like a monitor or a PC or a server, something like that, and is not consumable and non-fixed. Fixed items being, or non-fixed items, I should say, being things like CDs, pieces of RAM, things like that. We don't track those things. The other big part of my job is to ensure the accuracy of the database that we maintain. And this database is all the information about the asset, like what it is, who has it, things like that. This is important if we ever want to look up where a certain asset is or what assets people have. It can also be used for audits and metrics by management, so they can make decisions based on the assets that we have. So if have old workstations, they want to know how many so they can order the right amount so that no one's left with an old workstation. My other asset management job was to write procedures for other teams regarding how they should be dealing with us, the asset management team. If we did all the legwork for the other teams, we would be at work all day, every day, tracking assets and recording things for them. So we delegate tasks out to the other teams so they can do it themselves and save us a whole bunch of work, because there's no reason they can't just give us the information for when they move assets or it changes hands or things like that. And lastly, but certainly not the least, is we had to track maintenance information for these assets so that they're covered if they break and they don't come out of the Department of Defense pocket and inevitably the taxpayers' pockets. My secondary function when I was hired was for problem management work. These are things like knowledge documents, which people use for common information, or FAQs, things like how do I do this or how do I do that. My job is to write them and maintain them. For example, when our office updated to the most recent Microsoft Office version, I had to rewrite a large amount of the documents with new information because the way things were done between the two versions changed, so the documents had to change. Another thing I do is the LEAP, which registers new users on our Active Directory system so that they can log in with their common access card, referred to as a CAC. I also recover the certs that people lose when they get a new CAC card or their old one is destroyed, since every CAC card has a unique set of certificates. So if they get a new one, they have to be able to open up their old encrypted emails that were encrypted with their old certs. So that's what the key recovery process does. I also maintain the system's iWeb page, which is an easy way for people to get to the request forms and checklists that the systems division maintains. I also reset the user's PIN number if they forget it. That's a really easy process. My tertiary function when I was hired was to do desktop work. It wasn't to be a big part of my job. It just supposed to be to help out everybody. And desktop work mostly for me, involved setting up, moving, and picking up users' PCs. I'd also help them move between desks and things like that. Setups were the most complicated part of my job because I had to recast the PC with a brand new image so that it was like a fresh, clean slate for the user to work on, which took anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes, depending on how the system wanted to act that day. And my other big thing was to just troubleshoot basic things like a user's monitors flickering, or this program slowing down, or they don't have access to something, and I'd have to go up there and see what was wrong and troubleshoot it. And this was added on later into my employment. I had to start working on printer stuff. This involved just changing printer cartridges, fixing paper jams, easy stuff like that. So this next section is about my learning experience at DMDC. One of the big things for me was that I learned there was how to communicate a lot better. I quickly learned that you had to be able to communicate your ideas clearly and quickly so that people could understand what you're trying to say without having to stand there forever while you explain it to them, and that they don't have to ask you twice. That was the biggest problem, was having people ask you twice. Users, you have to make sure that they know you're working on the problem, that you're working on their problem, to be more specific. You can't leave them hanging. You can't just say, I'll get around to it later. You have to make them at least think that you're working on it and that you care about their problem. You also have to present your information in a way that your audience will understand it. For example, I'm not going to give a nitty-gritty presentation to my supervisors about something because they're probably not going to care. They're just going to want an overview. What sort of decision do you think I should make? Sort of report. They don't want to know all the little itty-bitty details about something. But when you do need to communicate to someone who does need to know the nitty-gritty, you have to be thorough with your communication. It's key. Time management was another thing that was very important that I learned. I learned that I had to stick to deadlines. That was the biggest thing. If your boss gave you something to do on Friday, you had to get it done, or else you're going to get yelled at. Things just aren't going to work great for you unless you finish your work on time. Another thing that happened often, at least for me, is that I would have 2 or 3 tasks that needed to get done right now, and people told me that they needed it done right now. And it was up to me to decide which tasks should be done immediately and in which order. And I needed to figure out a way to tell all the people that I couldn't help right away that I couldn't help them. There is a certain way you have to talk to people, like I said in the previous slide. Another big thing is you cannot waste time. You can't sit there and chill out and say, I'll do this later. There are some times when you can do that, but in general, that was not something that happened very often at DMDC. Okay, this next section is a few of the big accomplishments that I performed while I was at DMDC, but not necessarily during the internship class. The first big project I had when I first started in 2010 was to perform a enterprise-wide inventory. This meant not necessarily me physically being at the other sites on the East Coast, but I still had to get their data. That's not as important. What was important to me was that I had to inventory the entirety of DMDC West, which is where I work, which is 8 stories tall, full of offices. It started out as me and a few 5-6 other people, and slowly dwindled down till it was just me going office to office, getting information like the serial number and the inventory tag from monitors and workstations. The spreadsheet that we used ended up being very, very large. so large to the point where it's easier for me to just write it down on a piece of paper and then put it in later. The bonus was that I got to meet everyone in the building, which is pretty cool because now everyone has at least seen my face once. And it was a great introduction to the way that asset management works. I got to go over all the procedures, do all the entering the information in the database. It was a great experience. My next biggest task was the DRMO accessing job I had to do. This was done over 6 to 8 months because things kind of slowed down in the middle there when my first asset manager lead got fired, so things kind of slowed down until they found a replacement. But I had to degauss and break over 1,000 hard drives, which was very time consuming. You can only degauss a hard drive every minute and a half because that's how long the degaussing machine takes, and you can't put more than one in there, so it took forever. I also wrote the accessing procedures for other people to follow when I'm gone. It just details all the different things that they have to do, like make sure all the hard drives are taken out of the equipment, fill out all the paperwork, make sure everything's palletized right and shrink wrapped, things like that. A secondary thing that happened because of this DMO project was I had to clean out the systems warehouse, which was a mess when I started. We took out 6 or 7 dumpsters full of trash and styrofoam and threw away countless amounts of broken or unused equipment. It was quite a mess and a lot of work. We also organized everything and hung up signs and cleaned everything up. It was a really good project. Last but not least, I had some various small little things I did. For anyone listening to this that knew Jeff at DMDC, you know he was quite the hard man to work with. He was my first asset management lead before he got fired, but he was a very harsh introduction to how things go at DMDC. Another thing I thought I'm sort of proud of is having to test the key recovery documents for the desktop team by going out and actually testing it on live users and seeing where all the snags came. It was a lot of work. Also helping Frank McIntyre with the monthly printer reports was a pretty good accomplishment. He's the one who made them, but I helped populate them with data every month. Alright, if I can give any advice to people going into an internship program, specifically at DMDC, it's well worth it. You're paid pretty well for being a student. It's also a great learning environment because you get job experience, and the Department of Defense looks great on your resume. However, I would suggest interning at DMDC in a field you're interested in. For example, I wanted to be a programmer, but I did not get any of the programming jobs at DMDC, so I ended up in a more help desk style job, which isn't bad. I still learned a lot of things, but it wasn't directly related to what I was studying in school. You want to be persistent when you apply for a job, specifically at DMDC. It took me almost 6 months to get hired, and I kept calling back every 2-3 weeks, wondering what was happening with my application, and eventually, I'm pretty sure they got so annoyed at me they just gave me the job to shut me up. The most important thing though is to have fun. If you don't have fun, what's the point? It's a job and it's gonna suck sometimes, but all in all, I had a pretty good time. Thank you everyone for listening and watching my presentation. Thank you to DMDC and all the people I knew there, and thank you to Dr. Tao for letting me take this class.